for such a wonderful introduction. And so I just want to reiterate how excited I am to have your ears. I know that this is an exceptionally busy time for most counselors. School is starting if it hasn't already. And so I know that you are probably bombarded with many different priorities. So first and foremost, thank you for taking some time to hear this presentation about the Gates Scholarship. I'm also really excited because this is actually the second year of this program. And so last year, we didn't exactly know how the cohort would turn out, but we actually had an exceptional first cohort, and we're excited to be in the middle of recruiting our second cohort. And so because I know time is limited, I'll just go ahead and begin. So I want to start off with just a foundation. So what is the Gates Scholarship? And so I'll just read this verbatim. The Gates Scholarship is a highly selective full scholarship for exceptional Pell-eligible minority high school seniors. It was launched in 2018 and will be awarded to 300 student leaders each year over the life of the grant, with the intent of helping these students realize their maximum potential. In order to apply for this scholarship opportunity, students must be Pell eligible, which means that it's really the government's proxy for low income, and they must belong to one or more of the mentioned ethnic minority groups, which are African American, American Indian Alaska Native, Asian and Pacific Islander American, and Hispanic American. And so for those of you who are new to the scholarship program, and just in general, those of you who maybe don't know the history of the Gates Foundation and how they have supported low-income, high-achieving students, this is actually the second large scholarship that they sponsor for this particular population. And so in 1999, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation sponsored the Gates Millennium Scholarship. So the first cohort was selected in 1999, and that program lasted for 20 years. That program still currently exists, but they are not accepting nor are they selecting new scholars. So the last cohort was actually selected 2 years ago. There was a 1-year sort of break where there were no scholarships available to high school students by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And then the Gates Scholarship started last year, where we recruited and selected the first cohort. It's important to note that these are two distinct scholarship programs. And so while the Hispanic Scholarship Fund is in a great place to have helped manage the Gates Millennium and is currently managing the Gates Scholarship, they are two distinct programs. For this particular scholarship program, we are the sole administrators, and so we are actually working with all the different eligible ethnic groups and communities to ensure we have a robust pool and a fair selection process across all groups. And so that is the Gates Scholarship. Now, in terms of who is eligible, we are looking for high school seniors. We do sometimes get questions about students who are taking a year off, a gap year, which is becoming more and more common. If a student is currently in a gap year, that's okay. Really, this is just meant for students who are essentially 17 or 18. A big part of the scholarship program is the camaraderie and the network that these students built with each other. And so we want to make sure that they are in the same space in terms of their development, age range, things of that nature. So it really is for high school seniors, almost without exception. Again, as I mentioned earlier, students must belong to one of the 4 ethnic groups. Students must be Pell eligible. For students, there's a lot of questions about how to determine Pell eligibility at this point in time. Students can actually go to the FAFSA Forecaster, which is it's a government site, part of the Department of Education, and they can actually input their information there to get a sense of whether or not they are Pell eligible. And so Pell eligibility will be determined based on the FAFSA. Students will have to submit the FAFSA, and we actually have a partnership with the Department of Education to confirm this. And this is because the foundation wants to make sure that this is a scholarship that supports low-income students. Students must be U.S. citizen, national, or permanent resident. They must have a minimum cumulative weighted GPA of 3.3 on a 4.0 scale or equivalent. I know there are some high schools out there that actually do not have GPAs. They have different grading systems. And so really it's the equivalent depending on the weighting scale that you have, or if you do not award GPAs, we really are looking for students who are in the top 10% of their class or higher. And so we'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. And then finally, students must plan to enroll full-time in a 4-year degree program at a U.S. accredited not-for-profit private or public college or university. In terms of who we're looking for, we're looking for students who have an outstanding academic record in high school. And so here we list in the top 10% of his or her graduating class. And so and sort of to elaborate a little bit more on this, when we say top 10% of their class, we also, we're thinking not only in terms of the grades that a student may be receiving, but also the course rigor. This is a scholarship where we're really trying to support and award students who are maximizing the resources available to him or her at their respective high school. So that being the case, we are looking for students who have maximized the curriculum, whether that's honor level courses, AP courses, IB courses, dual enrollment courses, whatever kind of curriculum is offered at your particular high school. We just hope that the students who apply for the scholarship are taking advantage of those courses and are doing exceptionally well in those classes. And so you don't necessarily need to be the valedictorian in order to be selected as a Gates Scholar, but you should be a student who is enrolled along with the other top students in that respective class in those types of courses and who is doing well in those courses. Demonstrated leadership ability, and so this could be shown through community service, extracurricular activities. It could be through internships, jobs that a student holds. For this, actually, I do want to take just a quick second to talk about leadership and how we understand it. And that when we talk to students, we actually emphasize this. To us, leadership isn't only a title. There are students who are captain of the football team, who are president of their class, students who are founding different organizations and are leading those organizations, and that's great. We definitely want those students. We would never discourage those students from applying. In fact, we want those students to apply. That is a form of leadership. But leadership itself is a pretty nuanced concept. And so if you think about a student, let's say, who has to take care of his or her younger siblings after school because, let's say, both parents or one of their parents is working. And so, that student maybe doesn't have the opportunity to become captain of the soccer team, but they are taking care of their two younger siblings. They go home, pick them up from school, make sure that they do their homework, potentially cook for their younger siblings, and they themselves sit down to do their own classwork. That is leadership. That is taking on responsibilities that most adults, have once they start a family. So we could definitely consider that leadership. Another common example is parents own small business. And so let's say that mom and dad own a restaurant, as an example. And so the student has to work 2 to 3 hours after school at that restaurant to help close up shop. And then on the weekends, the student may work 10 hours total on site. And so because the student is devoting so many hours to helping run the small family business, that student may not necessarily be involved in 10 activities and leading activities at school, but nonetheless is a leader. They're learning great business skills. They're making sure that their family business is being run effectively and efficiently. And so that's leadership in itself. Or even let's take a student who, let's say, is doing research at a local university. There is no fancy title associated with, being the president of, the research lab. But doing research at the local, at a local university is in itself a form of leadership. Not many high school students do that. Other students may look at that as an example and then think about what opportunities are available to them and push their own boundaries, which is in itself leadership through example. And so we collect that in various stages. We obviously ask for students and their participation, but there's an interview depending whether or not, depending on how far the student advances in our selection process. There's an interview component, recommendation component. And so we're looking for all these kinds of things when we're thinking about leadership ability. And then finally, exceptional personal success skills. These are things like emotional maturity, motivation, perseverance. And so this will be measured through not only commitment to the activities that students decide to participate in, but also depending again on how far the student moves along in our selection process. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on in the presentation. It also comes through in the letters of recommendation. It'll come through in essays that students need to complete. It'll come through in the interview process. And so we're really looking for these skills that we all as adults know are necessary for success. There are times where you potentially wake up and you're really tired and you think, oh boy, it's only Thursday and I need to go to work, and you have to go to work, and you come to work and you push through the day. Being able to work well with others, when you encounter a stressful situation, being able to handle it in a mature way, both being able to have emotional maturity, professional acumen, etc. So these are the types of skills that we'll also be looking for in our students to ensure success in the short term when they're in college and are being exposed to really diverse communities, but also because the point or one of the biggest points of this program is to help ensure a successful transition into a career of choice for our students. We hope that these skills can be nurtured, fostered, so that they can effectively transition and be successful in the careers that they ultimately choose to go into. And so what does the scholarship cover? So at this point, I've spoken a little bit about its history, the types of students that we're looking for. So what is actually covered? So this is a last dollar scholarship, really designed to relieve all recipients of financial burden for paying for college. And so the program covers all tuition and fees, including room and board, that isn't already covered by family contribution and other gift aid. And so students are expected to complete the FAFSA, which is the free application for federal student aid, each year, and it's not a set scholarship. And so the amount of award that a student gets varies from year to year depending on need. So let's say maybe the school of attendance, the cost of attendance goes up, and so the student may need more financial assistance from us. Let's say maybe a parent loses a job, a student may need more financial assistance from us, or vice versa. Maybe a parent gets a promotion, and so a student needs less assistance from us. It really does change from year to year to make sure to ensure that we are providing the kind of financial assistance the student needs at every stepping point in their undergraduate career. In other words, at every year in their undergraduate career. The scholarship will be renewable for up to 5 years or until graduation, whichever comes first. And so students are actually eligible for 6 years, but one of those years is a deferment, which means that they are not eligible for funding if they choose to defer a year. But they have 5 years of funding if they are awarded this scholarship. And so I'll give just a quick example just to nail this point home in terms of how this would work. So let's say a student is attending a school that costs $10,000 a year total. That includes tuition, it includes room and board, it includes travel, miscellaneous fees, books, etc. The school itself costs $10,000, which at this point, it's a bargain. And let's say that the federal government comes back and says the student's family can afford to pay $1,000. And the school itself is really excited about this particular student, so they award the student a $6,000 scholarship. So the TGS or the Gates Scholarship Award would be the $10,000 minus the $1,000 family contribution, minus the $6,000 grant, let's say, that the school is giving the student. That remainder, which is $3,000, is what the Gates Scholarship Award will be. And as things change from year to year, whether it's the family contribution or the grant size, the TGS award, the Gates Scholarship Award, will be adjusted accordingly. And so how do students apply? Well, the application is actually currently open. The application opened on the 15th, as you can see there, and closes on the 18th. And so I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, boy, that's really soon. I wish I had heard about this or knew about this earlier. But don't fret. The good thing is that we actually developed an application that is multi-stage, and the first stage, which is currently open, is a short questionnaire. Realistically, we've done several runs with ourselves as staff and as well as students. It shouldn't take more than 45 minutes to an hour to complete this initial questionnaire. In fact, some students will complete it earlier. The questionnaire just has information, basic bio information on the student, where they live, birth date, etc. We do ask them to generally list the courses they're taking, their GPA, their extracurricular activities, and then some additional background information. And so if a student just has a copy of their own high school resume in front of them, they should be able to complete this questionnaire at a very short notice. In fact, last year, we were talking to students and counselors who only found out about this opportunity 2 days before the close date. And we were able to let them know that the questionnaire was didn't really require that much time. And so students were able to complete that night or the day it was due because it only does take about an hour at most to complete. So even though you may just be hearing about this opportunity now, please feel free to share this with all eligible students, knowing full well that they do have enough time to complete this initial questionnaire. That will close on the 18th, which is a few weeks from now, and then there will be a verification and selection process. At this point, we'll invite select students to come in to submit additional material. They'll be asked to complete the FAFSA, and then we'll be verifying all the documents that come in, as well as their PAL eligibility. Once that process is done internally, we will actually announce 2,000 semifinalists, and so they will have access to phase 2 of the application, and that will open on December 4th and close on January 15th. And so this is for this part of the application, we will be asking students to submit an update on their extracurricular activities as well as on their coursework. We will ask them to submit essays, 4 essays total, and we will ask them to submit 2 letters of recommendation. So at this point, the ask is a little bit bigger. It does take more than an hour to complete phase 2, but the timing we chose aligns with when the college applications are due. So students actually will have 2 weeks post the deadline for most college applications to complete this. And in terms of the recommendations, they actually are due on January 30th. And so teachers will have plenty of time after break to complete those 2 recommendations when the request is made from the student. For this portion, the 2,000 semifinalists that we select are all students who we would be happy to have as scholars. And so there really is a huge incentive to ensure that all students who do move on to the semifinalist phase complete this phase because at this point, they are very competitive candidates. It's no longer sort of a pipeline dream. It is very much a viable option for them. And so we, of course, do need more information, but all students should complete because they are definitely in the running. After all that is submitted, we of course do a read of the essays, we do a document review, and to select our finalists. And so in March, we actually will select 600 finalists, all of whom will be interviewed. And so we have volunteers all over the country who will conduct in-person as well as virtual video interviews during the month of March. And then afterwards, we'll give ourselves a little bit under 3 weeks to do the final selection with this new information on hand, and we will announce our 300 scholars on April 20th of 2019. All selected scholars will have to accept their scholarship program by the beginning of May, post their college matriculation decisions. And all scholars will attend a summer institute in June, where they'll have an opportunity to network with the other scholars, as well as to network with education professionals, as well as just professionals from different fields. It's really an institute that's meant to, A, create a sense of camaraderie amongst the different scholars, and B, inspire these students to really maximize their college experience once they step foot on their college campus. And so if you're interested in sort of just getting a quick summary, I know that we are following up with this PowerPoint presentation, but we also have a video. And so this PPT or the PDF that you'll get is hyperlinked, and so you'll be able to just visit this video. If not, the link is included below. And so it's a very short video, a little bit over 3 minutes, that just quickly, you can actually easily share this, and it just quickly talks about the program, its history, who's eligible, and the kind of support services that we'll be providing to students. And I do want to highlight that the video does a good job of really not only describing the financial incentives, but also the kinds of support services we'll be providing to our students to really make sure that they develop as leaders. We are going to be providing support through all 4 years, including career development, because we do know that even very smart, very successful students stumble in college, and once they get towards the end of college, sometimes they don't know what next steps are. Their whole lives they've been told, especially students who are first generation low income students, their whole lives they've been told, get to college, get to a great college. And once they get to college, it's all about graduation. but what's next? And as we all know, what's next is just as important as getting to college. It's about planning for your future career, making sure that you're applying to internships, making sure that you're networking with appropriate individuals, so that you can transition to your career of choice, to a position that would allow you to grow, and so that you sort of get off on the right foot. And so our website is thegatescholarship.org. So feel free to visit if you want to learn more about the scholarship opportunity. There is a place where you can actually refer students. You can see it there. It's the third tab. It says refer students. You can go on there and actually input a student's information, and they'll get sent an email from us inviting them to apply, and then we will do follow-up communications to ensure that they are well aware of the deadlines and when things are due. You can also just share this link with students, share the video. I know that College Greenlight will be sending a follow-up email, and then tomorrow you'll get another follow-up email from us, just so that you have access to all this information and you can easily just disseminate information both via your social media platforms as well as via email and just word of mouth. And then last thing I want to just highlight is, again, the Gates Qualifying Questionnaire is currently open, and it does close on September 18th. It's not too late to let students know about this opportunity, even if they're hearing about it for the first time. It really only takes 45 minutes to an hour to complete. So please, please, please share this information with any students you think may be competitive for this opportunity. And so with that, I want to thank you for listening to my presentation. I know that we now have questions, and so I'd like to sort of transition to that.
Thanks so much, Daniel. That was very informative. Now let's get to the fun part. Let's ask those questions. Okay, give me 1 second. All right, so the first question, are DACA students eligible?
That's a great question. So DACA students are not eligible for this particular program, but we actually have resources that we can send you. So if you visit our website, so as the administrators, the Hispanic Scholarship Fund, you visit our website, you can get in touch with us and we can send you additional information about scholarship opportunities for DACA students. However, for the Gates Scholarship, DACA students are not eligible.
And I would also like to piggyback. College Greenlight has a scholarship for has a resource for scholarships for undocumented students that we will be publishing soon. So we'll be sending that out to our counselor community very soon. Next question: how will students at very small schools be impacted by the top 10% of the class guideline?
Oh, another good question. So, we do, when we're collecting information, both from the student, and we actually do collect information from counselors as well for students who move through the different phases, we do ask about class size. And that was a very active choice because there are some students, even in thinking about the recent cohort, who attend a school where the graduating class is 20, 25, 30 students. And so when you have a cohort that small, being number 4, let's say out of 25 students, means you're not really in the top 10% of your class, but you, however, could still be a straight A student. Maybe you just took one less honors course. It could be something that was maybe out of your control that knocked you out of the top 3 positions. And so we don't eliminate anyone based on their class rank solely. We look at the whole context. And so if it's a very small school, or if it's a school, a lot of schools do not rank. And so there are a lot of students who were selected who we don't know what their class rank was officially. We know they're great students. We know they're taking rigorous coursework. We know they're doing exceptionally well in those classes. But if you were to ask me, are they, top 2%, top 3%, top 5%, I wouldn't be able to answer because the school does not rank. And so, that's more just a guiding principle, just to give people a sense of the kinds of students we're looking for. But if there are scenarios that are the exception to the rule, it doesn't necessarily mean that student is not appealing or competitive to us. So please encourage students who you think are competitive to apply, even if they fall out of that, let's say 10% range, because they go to a small school or for any other reasons.
Great. Next question, how regarding homeschool, how are homeschool students, or do they qualify? And if they do, how will they submit for this scholarship?
So yes, homeschool students are eligible for the scholarship opportunity. And so how do they apply? The initial questionnaires actually can be completed by any student, including homeschool students. And so if the school does not, if the homeschool student does not receive a GPA, most homeschool students actually do have a GPA, but if for some reason in this particular case, the student does not, in the GPA section, there's actually sort of another option where the student can then write in their specific circumstances. And so when we're reviewing all the questionnaires, we'll look closely at that written response to get a better sense of the students and what their circumstances are. And so they are eligible to apply. And then moving forward, of course, in terms of counselors and in terms of teachers, it really does depend on the homeschool situation. They're pretty vast and varied actually across the country, depending on just different regulations by district, by state level, et cetera. And so depending on the specifics, we actually work with those students on an individual basis for those students who are advancing to future phases of the application process. But definitely yes, apply if a student is competitive.
Thank you. Next question. This is a common question. Can a Middle Eastern student apply?
That's a good question. So we actually use the U.S. Census. They have a definition for these different subgroups, and so if a student identifies with any of the eligible subgroups, then they should apply. If they do not identify, then unfortunately they're not eligible for this scholarship opportunity. And so the reason I say that is because the Middle East is itself pretty diverse, and so just saying that someone is from a particular country doesn't necessarily tell me how they identify here in the U.S. or if they identify with any particular subgroup that is eligible. So I would encourage students who have questions about that to visit the U.S. Census Bureau's definitions for the different eligibility groups, and to then ask themselves if they identify with any of the eligible subgroups.
Next question. Are QuestBridge and Gates scholarship compatible?
That's a good question. And so I'm reading two questions into that. So by compatible, the first question is, can you receive both? And the answer is yes. You can be a QuestBridge scholar and you can also be a Gates scholar. In fact, we don't have any restrictions if you are awarded the scholarship regarding any other kinds of outside funding. So you are eligible to accept any other kinds of other help and opportunities that a student's been awarded. In terms of are they compatible, I'm reading that are there advantages to having both? In other words, do both programs provide unique opportunities and unique funding that would make a student want to accept both? And so the answer for that is yes. I know both programs actually offer support services for students, but the kinds of supports and the way in which those support services are delivered are different. And so just thinking about, and even just different perspectives potentially on, let's say, career advice, or thinking about social emotional support and integration. And so I would say that just having access to more information and to different perspectives is always good for a student. And so you will have in parallel two different programs providing their own points of view and their own support services at the same time. And so that's always good for a student to have that and to utilize that. And then separately, above and beyond that, there is there are slight differences in funding that students in both scholarship programs. So for example, the Gates Scholarship, when the school allows it, does cover work study. It does cover the student summer contribution. We do have a technology budget that a student can take advantage of to, let's say, purchase a computer. And so in all of those cases, those are things that aren't necessarily funded through QuestBridge, and so the student can take advantage of that through Gates. And so there are different opportunities that a student can sort of benefit from by accepting both.
Can educators sign up to see what the questionnaire or application looks like?
Parents can sign up. If you do sign up, you can, and counselors as well, you would have to register as a student account. And so you can then see what the application is. What we did notice last year, and what I would highly discourage is, last year there were cases where a parent would actually submit a student's application, and so that is a big red flag for us. And so if we do find out that a parent completed and submitted the application on behalf of the student, we will actually disqualify that student. And so I would actually tell individuals who do that to, if they want to look at the application, by all means to look at the application, but to not submit on behalf of a student.
Does a counselor recommendation increase the chance of that student receiving the scholarship?
I guess there's two questions I'm reading, and they're actually two distinct questions here. One is, if someone refers a student on our site, does that increase his or her chances of being awarded? And the answer is no. It's just a referral, and so that's just to get students on our radar and to get them on our to make sure that we know that there are students who someone thinks is eligible, and so they'll be included in our marketing communications and our recruitment efforts. But no, the students who are recommended or referred is the actual word. It's not a recommendation. Students who are referred do not have an advantage in our process. For counselors or for students who advance to later phases where they have to actually submit a counselor recommendation, what the counselor says is very important to us. And so at that point, the counselor evaluation and any comments the counselor provides are very important and can be very beneficial to a student's particular case.
The next question is, in the qualifying questionnaire, I saw that you asked the candidates if they participate in certain academic support groups or community groups. My candidates participate in groups that aren't on your list. Is there a place for them to record the information for you to review? They are concerned that they won't be as competitive as other candidates.
Oh, no, that's actually a great question. So the answer is there's no need to be concerned about that. There is a place where they can write that in. We usually tell students to write it in the extracurricular section. And so they can write in whether it's a summer program or whether it's a year-long programs that aren't included on that list. They can include it there in the extracurricular participation section as one of their activities. And so for us, that was just a list that we created. Last year, we actually left the option for other, but what we found from that is that because they were programs that we weren't necessarily familiar with, we then had to do a lot of research to figure out, what the average participation for a student in those programs was. Was it a summer program? What's the average number of hours? And so because of that, we thought, well, if we don't know or aren't familiar with the program, it's not that it's less than the programs that are listed there, but if it's listed as an extracurricular activity, we then know what the involvement and commitment is to that particular activity. And so we made the move to get rid of the other, and so now students are encouraged to include those programs and participation in those activities in the activities section.
Perfect. And we had a couple of questions regarding the Summer Institute. They wanted to know, where is it located and what is the timeline? How long is the program?
So the Summer Institute is a 4-day conference, 4-day overnight. And so it begins on Tuesday and ends on Sunday, and it's the last week of June. This particular year, I think the last week of June bleeds into to July, and so it's the previous week to that. And so the calendar changes from year to year, but it's towards the end of June that it will happen every year.
Thank you. Are test scores like AP, SAT, or ACT factors that get weighed in determining course rigor?
Oh, that's a good question. So for ACT and SAT scores, no, those are not considered as part of the course rigor. But we do look at performance on AP exams as well as IB exams. Sometimes students will submit A-level exams. For students doing dual enrollment, if they advance to future phases, if the dual enrollment courses are not listed on their transcript, we will actually we will request college level transcript from those students. And so we do look at that as part of overall performance in combination with the transcript itself. And then of course we do also look at standardized test scores. But I do want to say that these are a few of many different data points that are taken into consideration. They are important, obviously, because we are looking for students who have excelled academically, but there is no necessarily breaking point in context of the entire profile. It really is a combination of many different factors that leads to ultimate selection of a student.
Thank you. This is an interesting question. Are students who attend alternative education schools, like blended learning with classroom instruction and online instruction, eligible?
Yes, they are eligible. In those cases, they would be treated just like any other applicant. I've seen those cases before, and there are always the transcript reflects the grades and reflects the types of courses and whether or not they were taken online or on site, etc. And so we're not in a place where we're judging, let's say, a school's curricular choices. What we want are students who, at their respective high school, are maximizing the choices that are offered to them. And so students who are eligible, if they attend those types of schools, as long as they're in their senior year.
We had several of these questions. Can you provide more information on what the selection process looks like? Are there committees that review applications? What does it look like as a whole? What is your approach?
That's a good question. And so for us, we actually have an internal committee that will review the selection process at all stages. And so part of the scholarships team, while we wear different hats in terms of our specific roles and how we support students along the scholarship process, and even once they're in college, we all form part of the selection committee. And so we actually, similar to what a lot of colleges will do, there's a sort of initial gathering of data and just some cleanup that happens when we do get those applications, and then we all as a committee will review the cases that are the strongest, and so we'll sit and we'll discuss about we'll look at many different factors. So obviously you have the individual case per student, but you also have to think a lot more sort of big picture, look at what states are being represented here. Are there any states where we are missing representation? And so we'll dive into those states, and we won't necessarily select a student simply because they're from a particular state, but we want to say we looked at all the candidates from that state, and this was an informed decision to either move forward with these few or to not move forward with any candidates from this particular state. And so those kinds of conversations are had by committee here at HSF, which is the administrator. In terms of outside voices that add to the selection process, obviously you have the recommenders, but we also have volunteers who serve as our readers and our interviewers. And so our readers and interviewers will actually complete forms that are evaluative in nature that will then allow the committee internally to get a better sense of how that's those students' essays, that student's voice, that student's perspective, their interview skills, etc. And so our interviews are actually, there's a selection process for that as well. an interviewer and our readers need to apply. They need to go through a certification process, and then once they're certified, then they can actually volunteer and read for us. And so they're also a very important voice in our selection process.
And we have a follow-up question. How do you apply to be a reader or interviewer?
That's a great question. I'm glad someone asked. So we will actually be following up. We've been building up lists, and so we'll be following up. Most likely in October, we'll start recruiting for readers, and then we need to decide whether we're going to do this simultaneously or potentially wait a couple of months. We're going to then start recruiting interviewers. The reason being that our readers will actually start reading in January, and our interviewers don't start interviewing until March. And so we want to make sure that we give people enough time to apply, that we select on our end, and that the readers certify, as well as interviewers. And so that recruitment process will start in a few months. And so if you are interested, make sure you can actually send us a message via the TGS site. You can just on the contact, you can contact us and just send us a message. Or what we'll do is, I'm thinking that I could do for this particular year, I can send a quick invite to participants of this webinar, just a one-time invite, and anyone who's interested can apply to be a reader as well. We definitely are interested in getting people who work directly with students or have a lot of experience working with students, just because they are the ones who are able to we think have a great perspective when it comes to evaluating essays completed by 17 and 18-year-olds, and they're the ones who are great at also interviewing 17 and 18-year-olds, just because it's a very specific population at a very specific point in time, and so it's different than, let's say, someone who's used to interviewing 35-year-olds for middle management positions at a company.
We have a couple questions, follow-up questions regarding that, but I'm going to allow you guys to have those offline conversations regarding interest in being a reader. But I would like to follow up and ask a CBO-related question. So Michael writes, I'm in charge of a college access program for CBO. Can I act as a point person to present transcripts and other materials, or do they have to come directly from the high school?
Yeah, so we actually did receive this question a lot last year. No, so the transcripts themselves need to come directly from the high school counselor. The reason being that that is what we accept as the official transcript, and so we need it to come directly from the institution that the student attends. Not that as a CBO director you don't have access to what is official, and not that we don't, not that we wouldn't believe you, but we just need, for our sake and our internal processes, we need to make sure that all documents are sourced from the original source, which would be the high school. So they have to come from the high school.
Thank you. Next question is, what is the starting amount of scholarship, or is it relative to total cost of attendance? We actually got a lot of questions regarding displacement, and if students were to receive other funding, how does Gates approach that dilemma?
Mm-hmm. So for the first question, it really, again, it varies on the individual case of the student. And so some students may need more aid, just given the cost of attendance is higher and the gift aid they're receiving is lower. There are some students who get $0 from us. They're still a scholar, but they get $0 because they attend a school that is generous, and so they're getting great scholarships and grants from them. Their EFC is very low. And they maybe have other outside awards. So there are scholars who get $0 from us, and there are scholars who get a lot more. So it does depend on the COA and specific circumstances around other grants and scholarships that students may have. Regarding displacement, that really depends on the institutions. And so we work with different institutions to try and minimize that. But when it does occur, it's a conversation starter. And so our interest is in supporting the students as best as we can, but we are limited to financial aid policies that different institutions have. And B, when there is displacement, then we work with the institution to come to an agreement. But the student will never be negatively impacted, regardless of what comes out of those conversations. This scholarship will come in and support within our guidelines what makes the most sense. So if that means having a larger Gates Award, then that is what's happened. I know that that's what happened in other programs, and I imagine that that's what will happen for this program. Again, it's year one, and so we're actually going through the disbursement process right now for our first cohort. But as things change, Gates is committed, or the scholarship program is committed to ensuring that we, even if it means raising the award, ensuring that students get the financial support that they need.
Thank you. Is a student eligible if they are currently not Pell eligible due to a one-time payment on their parents' taxes? I think they are providing a specific example of a parent was laid off and received a lump sum of money for living expenses. With the lump sum, the taxes show over $100,000 in income, but without the lump sum, their income is significantly less, approximately 40K for a family of four.
So this is where it gets difficult, because we have to go by what the Department of Education is telling us, and we actually do not do personalized reviews for exceptional circumstances. So if someone is in a situation that's the exception to the rule, they would have to work with the Department of Education, specifically the group that manages, or the sub-department that manages the FAFSA, to see what their options are in order to effectively convey that information. But we are beholden to what we get from the Department of Education. And so the Department of Education, when we gather that data says a student is not Pell eligible, then unfortunately that student does not move forward to future stages of the application process.
Okay, we got a good question. I like this one. What are the key things students should include in their writing supplements? What makes a student stand out? And we also had a really clever question. Could you talk a little bit more, provide an example of one of last year's students who had essays who resonated with you the most?
So the first one, it really is pretty vast and varied. And I say that because in thinking about the last cohort, the skill sets that they brought were very different. And so we had some students who were exceptional dancers, who were actually composers, and who stood out because of the impact that they were having in their communities in music. They were great violinists. They were actually producing YouTube videos that were going viral. But we also had students who were great at math and were winning math competitions. We had students who were great in science. And so, in other words, what makes a student stand out isn't a particular kind of accomplishment. It's more about just having accomplishment in whatever he or she does. And so in terms of submitting information, sometimes we do get additional letters of recommendation, sometimes we get updates, and those are great, but really a lot is already said and stated in the application itself. And students who advance to phase 2, we actually collect a resume where we can get a very clear picture of the accomplishments students have in their respective activities. And so I would say it's not a specific thing, it's more about just general, generally speaking, just doing things really well and excelling in the things that they do. To the second point, I'll start off by saying that we're actually going to change our essays this year. And so our essays will be rotating. And so I can only really give more general advice. It's authenticity in the essays. I think students will sometimes write essays where they tell you what you think you want to hear as opposed to genuine stories. And so, there was a general question about overcoming adversity or an obstacle. And the essays, again, just because there were so many different students with such diverse perspective, the essays that stood out the most were the ones where students would ground sort of what they learned and their experiences on things that were important to them. So it wasn't necessarily overcoming poverty. It could have been something like overcoming insecurities, which is just sort of a general statement that applies to all people, regardless of socioeconomic background. It could have been dealing with a particular relationship. So things that were just very important to that student, that were genuine, and that allowed them to then, on a very deep and sophisticated level, talk about the growth and what they learned from that experience and how that applies to them moving forward. So I would just say it's authenticity in the voice and the topics that they choose.
Thank you, Daniel. We do have another question regarding if counselors have additional questions, how should they get in contact with you? And is this a different contact for students and parent questions?
So the easiest way is to actually send us a message via our message center, which is on our website. So it's a contact us form, and you put in the information there. And there isn't at this point necessarily a separation in that way between counselors and parents. And a lot of the questions that actually counselors and parents have tend to blend a lot in terms of just general topics and themes. And so they sort of, we actually categorize them into more general buckets, not necessarily counselor v parent.
Ella has a question regarding independent students. So for students who are considered financially independent, is there any follow-up documentation required to document their financial need? She mentioned she works primarily with homeless students or students who are in foster care.
That's a great question. As long as they're able to, so we actually just use the FAFSA. And so no additional documentation is needed on our end. I do know that a lot of schools, for their financial aid, they do require additional documents. But for us, it's really just the submission of the FAFSA, so that we can then gather that information directly from the Department of Education. That is, in terms of a financial perspective and determining Pell eligibility, that is our guiding star. Once it comes to disbursement, again, no additional documents would be sent to us. We rely solely on the cost of attendance that the schools provide. And so there's actually a portal that financial aid officers at schools go into and input the information, and that determines an award that we then disperse. And so if the school needs additional documentation, it would go directly to their office, and then we rely on them and their professional judgment to then tell us what the cost of attendance is, the kinds of awards that student is eligible for, and what the unmet need is, which we would then go in and pay.
Thank you, Danielle. All right, guys, we are at the top of the hour. I think we exhausted Danielle. I'm going to unfortunately have to cut out so that we can